Hello everyone, welcome back to the course on Health Humanities, Indian and Western Medical Knowledge Traditions. This is lecture number 50 on human-nature relationship in Shakespeare's Tempest. In this lecture, I will talk about the representation of the natural world in the Shakespeare's play The Tempest, and then how it brings anthropocentric notions versus the glorification and reverence for nature. In this section, I will deal with how we have the nature which have been dominated by human beings, other nature which is seen as to be in the advantage and benefit of human beings, and nature as human centric. And then I will focus on also that how certain characters revere and glorify nature. Further, I will talk about the role of colonial power and how power and domination has led to the ecological exploitation in the play. And in this play, we have two sets of character. One is like Prospero and his group of people who are seen to be intervening in the natural world and exploiting it, controlling it for the sake of human beings. And the other set of characters are like Caliban and Ariel, who are seen as indigenous creatures or indigenous beings. And they have also been seen that Prospero is trying to control them as well, trying to civilize them, but in the name of civilization, attempts to control them. Then I'll also bring how modern eco-critical and environmental readings can be brought to understand the play Tempest, and then see how the intervention of human beings has affected nature, its beings, its flora and fauna. When we look at the play is about Prospero, who has been thrown from his place, and then he comes to an unknown island, and this island is ruled by a lady named Sycorax. Prospero usurps the throne from Sycorax and then tries to control the environment, tries to control the island as per his needs, as per his desires. And we find that in his process of control, we also find the representation of nature. And in the play, nature is seen in terms of vivid descriptions of the natural world within the different characters and their perceptions of the island, how different characters perceive the island. While other characters in the play have an anthropocentric view, other characters consider that nature is for the sake of human beings, and they think that all the elements of the island, unknown island, is for the benefit of human beings, and hence Prospero and his group of people consider that nature is having the qualities to fulfill the human needs. They have anthropocentric views about the nature. They consider that the natural world and the island's resources, Caliban island's resources, are for the sake of human beings. However, Caliban appreciates the natural world. He appreciates the island. He appreciates the resources of the island. And he thinks that some of them are for his personal gain and consumptions, but we do not find any kind of any elements of exploitation through Caliban. He delivers a speech, and in his speech, he tries to represent the image of island, the vivid portrayal of the island, and it shows that how he venerates, how he in a way glorifies the island. And the description of the island is as follows: his veneration for the isle be feared not. The isle is full of noises, sounds, and sweet airs that gives delight and hurt not. Sometimes 1,000 twangling instruments will hum about mine ear, and sometimes voices that if I then had walked after long sleep will make me sleep again, and then in dreaming the clouds methought would open, the show reaches ready to drop upon me. In this way, Caliban represents the island, which is full of different beings, different we have different types of biodiversity on the island, and this biodiversity creates a different kind of sound, a humming sound, and as if that there are some kind of instruments which are twangling, which are creating these sounds. And the idea that the isle is full of noises represents that how the nature is protected and how we have different kinds of animals, birds, and other beings who are residing there and making their noises. We also find that it appears that one is in dream, one has waked up after a long sleep. So island makes an impression that this may not be the real world. This is something that one is dreaming and trying to actually transport human beings to the world of dream, to the world of imagination, and to the world of different kind of world, different kind of universe, which reveals how nature is having all kind of elements, all kind of beings to its own world. This description of Caliban provides that the readers are having also the pleasure and delights from the natural world. So the description of Caliban gives a vivid portrayal of the island, which delights and which provides some kind of happiness to the readers. They feel happy with the perception of the natural world. However, humans typically adopt an anthropocentric view towards the natural world. But Caliban considers that natural world is one of reverence. In this way, we find how we have contrast between the civilized world, between Milan, Naples, and this island. So the civilized world, which is the place where Prospero belonged, there was no such kind of sound, which was empty from all different kinds of beings. But this island is having all the primitive creatures. And then we find the primitiveness of nature in the island, and the civilized world has destroyed this primitiveness. And we also see that nature is a place of transformation and revelation. Nature provides space where we find how Prospero is transforming himself and how he reveals his art and his magic. When we see Alonso, king of Naples, and his crew are shipwrecked upon the island, the men adopt a different views towards the island and debate its beauty and resources. One of the characters, like Adrian and Antonio, and along with Sebastian and Gonzalo, talk about the presence of nature. Adrian says uninhabitable and almost inaccessible. It must need it must needs be of subtle, tender, and delicate temperance, which means that the island is uninhabitable, where no other human beings are there. It is inaccessible to the human beings. It represents the dark ecology. It represents the unravished nature. It represents the nature in its original form. It further represents that it must needs be of subtle, tender, delicate temperance, and where they need a different approach. But Antonio counters this. Antonio says temperance was a delicate wench, that there is no need for any kind of different approach, different temperance. And then Adrian says, the air breathes upon us here most sweetly. Then Sebastian argues, or as if it had lungs and rotten ones. Antonio says, or as it were perfumed by a fan. Gonzalo then asserts, here is everything advantageous to life. How lush and lusty the grass looks, how green. Antonio affirms, the ground indeed is tawny. So this conversation reveals that the atmosphere, the surroundings are very different. It says that the air is having its own lungs and it is breathing. So the kind of humming sound is produced as if the space, the air breathes and it has lungs, though not in a good condition. Antonio says that there is some special kind of fragrance, and this special kind of fragrance reveals that the nature is perfumed by a fan. And then Gonzalo says, here we find everything for the sake of human beings, everything advantageous to life. It is anthropocentric perspective. It is human-centric perspective that everything in the nature is for the sake of human beings. He talks about the atmosphere, about the grass, how they look green, how they look, that everything is in its original form. So this reveals that nature is very different. The island is very different. It is full of beauty, full of resources. And in this conversation, Gonzalo adopts an appreciative perspective of the island and its qualities, while others retain their preconceived notions about the natural world's barbarity, unsuitability for human survival and prosperity. So we find that we have two types of approaches, points of view. So some appreciate the beauty of island and some consider that it is difficult for human beings to survive here, and it looks that it is having barbaric and uninhabitable uninhabitable island, which means it is risky for human beings to survive there. One must also compare Caliban's point of view because he is a native islander and who thinks the island that the island's visitors are there to intrude upon them, while Caliban dreams of the riches island may bestow upon him. That island can make him rich. There are resources, elements, there are so many products on the island which will make him rich. So he thinks about the richness of the island, the full of elements of the island. He views of the island is not solely anthropocentric. So Caliban believes that island may make him rich, can provide him everything which he needs, but at the same time he appreciates the resources and the beauty of human beings. Though he dreams, but he never tries to molest the island, never tries to damage the condition of the island. So island remains in its natural form. If they had taken enough advantage of the island, since his mother was ruler, island could have been destroyed, but island is in its natural shape and form. It means he is not having anthropocentric perspective about island. He is not using island for the sake of for his own benefit. He truly reveres the island for its natural wonders and delights. He appreciates but doesn't feel entitled to its resources. He says that the island has a lot of resources, but doesn't believe that he is entitled for all those resources. He has his own right over those resources. On the contrary, Gonzalo, Antonio, and Adrian, they appreciate the grass, they appreciate the air and temperance of the island, solely because they find it to be advantageous to life, which means if they appreciate, but their appreciation is human-centric. They do not consider nature for the sake of nature. They do not consider that nature exists for its own sake. Rather, nature is for the advantage and benefit of human beings. And Prospero, through his magic, tries to dominate over the natural elements. He believes that nature is something which can be mastered. Nature is something which can be controlled. When we look at some of the post-colonial readings of the play Tempest, we find that the relationship between Prospero and Caliban, the relationship between colonizer and colonized. But we also find that the play can be seen from eco-critical perspective, and it is essential that one analyzes the relationship between Prospero and other humans and the natural world as well, where we find that Prospero and other human beings have the approach of colonizers. They try to colonize not just the native inhabitants, but also the nature. We find that they try to control and dominate over the nature and over the indigenous population. Dan Bratton asserts that the play Tempest is a play about the human control over the biophysical environment. The plot of the play is driven by characters who attempt to master the terrain of the island. Prospero, Sycorax, Caliban, and the drunken mutineers Stefano and Trinculo all strive for ownership and control of the ground. In a way, everyone tries to control the island. They want to have their own rule over the island. So from Prospero to everyone, including Stefano and Tranquillo, they want to have ownership of the island. They want to be the controller of the island. We find Prospero and Sycorax are granted power over the natural world with the aid of their magic and art. Prospero's art grants him the ability to manipulate different aspects of the natural world, such as the weather. He produces wild waters and causes the sky to pour down stinking pitch, inducing a raging storm to shipwreck his brother Antonio, who usurped his position as the Duke of Milan, and his crew. It reveals how Prospero, through his magical power, tries to actually cause and raise a storm, and how that the shipwreckage has been caused by the human interventions. Though in the case of Shakespeare, he says this is through magical powers. Suppose we replace it in contemporary times, and then there is no magical power in the contemporary times which can raise storms. Rather, one can actually raise a storm through certain kind of interventions. It can be nuclear explosions, it could be missile explosions, and some other forms of blasts that can raise the storms, that can disturb the level of sea. So what we find in the case of Prospero, it can be done in the present time in a different way, and it reveals that how the interventions of human beings have led to the disturbance of the sea. So Prospero and Sycorax, both of them are granted power over the natural world with the aid of their magic and art. And Prospero has this power that he can do whatever he wants. He can produce wild waters, and he can cause the sky to pour down stinking pitch. He can introduce raised storm. He can introduce a storm that can shipwreck, that can destroy the ship. And Sycorax also is having power, and she is capable of that magic which grants her power over the natural world. Sycorax was a witch and one so strong that could control the moon, make flows and ebbs, and deal in her command without her power. Which means Sycorax has power to control the moon, and this controlling of moon will bring flows and ebbs, and it can bring disturbance in the sea. Bratton claims that Prospero exercises similar powers to a creator god over the biophysical environment. Prospero's art allows him to enact a vengeful act against those whom he feels disserviced by, and thus he feels entitled to exploit the powers of natural world for his own personal gains. In this way, we find that Prospero feels cheated and he feels that he has been given no share in the property by his brother, and he can take revenge, and for the sake of revenge he can disturb the nature. So we find that human beings are seen as destructors, as destroyer of the nature. In this way, Prospero's view of the natural world is anthropocentric. He considers that this nature is for his benefit, for his advantage, so that he can take revenge, he can fulfill his own desires, which means he views the natural world as a resource for human use and human gains. It is only in the relation to human beings that anything else has value. So whatever else is having value in the nature, their value exists only in the context of nature. So we find that Prospero uses his art and power over the natural world for personal gains. However, it is not clear whether or not Sycorax also manipulated the natural world for personal gains. The play doesn't give any evidence that Sycorax was able to manipulate the natural world for her own advantage, for her own benefit. The text reveals that she was mischievous and that she was banished from Argia due to her terrible sorcery. And in this regard, Frank Kermode compares Prospero and Sycorax art, stating that Sycorax is a practitioner of natural magic, a Goetist who exploited the universal sympathies, but whose power is limited by the fact that she could command as a rule only devils and the lowest order of the spirit, and hence she has less power to intervene and to damage the environment and the nature. On the other hand, Prospero is a theurgist whose art is to achieve supremacy over the natural world by holy magic, which means Prospero can control the way nature the way he wants, and he can use it for his own benefit and for his own advantage. Prospero's relationship with the natural world is one of tyranny and domination. Rather than adopts a biocentric view of the natural world and uses his art for the benefit of biosphere as a whole, he is guided by an anthropocentric attitude, disregarding the effects that his magic may have upon the natural world. So Prospero is not having any consideration for the nature. He is not having biocentric perspective to the natural world. He believes that everything is for the sake of human being. He is having anthropocentric perspective. He discredits, disregards everything else which is for the sake of nature, and he thinks it is for his own advantage and benefit. The exposure to the natural world serves a punishment to both human beings and other creatures. And when we look from the eco-critical perspective, we must recognize the significance of Ariel's imprisonment in a natural structure and the fact that Prospero's punishment of Antonio and his crew involves their shipwrecking on a desert and uninhabitable island. we find that there are instances where not only nature is exploited but also other creatures. For example, Ariel is imprisoned. He wants to get free. And we find the examples of shipwrecks, and also before Prospero imprisons Ariel, and before Prospero's arrival on the island, the spirit Ariel was imprisoned by Sycorax, who manipulates a pine tree to imprison him. She did confine thee into a cloven pine, within which rift imprisoned thou didst painfully remain a dozen years, within which space she died and left thee there. It reveals that for over a dozen years, Ariel was imprisoned by Sycorax. So we find that we have exploitation of other beings by Sycorax and also by the so-called civilized human beings like Prospero. Prospero has also imprisoned Ariel. In this way, the notion of colonial power and domination intrudes over the island, and it affects its beings, it affects its nature. And when Ariel questions Prospero's dominance, when he questions that why he does so, why he has been imprisoned, and then Prospero threatens, Prospero asserts to rend an oak and peg thee in his knotty entrails till thou hast howled away 12 winters, revealing that if you question this, then you will be further imprisoned for another 12 years, another 12 winters. Even the indigenous spirit Ariel, the natural world, and the island serve as a source of imprisonment and punishment. We find that we have exploitation of nature by the nature. We have different trees that who have certain kind of spirits, and then they control other beings. This is very different kind of representation which Shakespeare provides. However, the difference is that when nature exploits with the intervention of human beings. Nature does not exploit by itself. And so we have come over here that we have exploitation of nature and other beings of nature by Prospero, then by Caliban, and then by nature itself. So we have multiple layers of exploitation and multiple forms of exploitation on the island. Each is trying to manipulate and control the other people, the other beings. The natural world is even more threatening to humans due to their preconceived notions about its inability to foster and sustain human life. The play provides certain examples where nature threatens human beings. There are other examples. For example, in Tennyson, he calls nature red in tooth and claw. Look at Ted Hughes. He finds nature is full of violence. Look at Thomas Hardy. He finds that nature is destructive for human beings. So we find over here that it is not only human beings who destroy nature, but nature also destroys human beings. They attempt to threaten the existence of human beings. The tempestuous waters threaten the shipmates. The tempestuous water threatens the shipmates' lives, and Prospero's storms serve as a means to punish those who have usurped him. So, with the intervention of human beings, we have like waters, we have storms who try to punish other human beings, and the play also depicts that the natural world serves to imprison and punish those who have wronged those who can exert their power over the natural world. Restricted by natural structures, Ariel and Alonso's shipmates are dependent upon Prospero's power to be freed from their physical confinement and punishment. So, Ariel, who belongs to the island, who is the inhabitant and a being of the island, but is confined and punished by Prospero. He has no freedom and liberty. He can be freed only by the will of Prospero, not by himself alone. However, Prospero's magical power are limited to the physical world, as his magic cannot directly influence the will of humankind. Though his deceit and trickery can manipulate the thoughts and actions of the others. Prospero has power, but his powers are limited. For example, although Prospero's magic cannot change Caliban's thoughts or force him to perform actions, he can use his art to influence Caliban's actions by causing him physical pain. If thou neglectest or dost unwillingly what I command, I'll rack thee with old cramps, fill all thy bones with itches, make thee roar. He says that if you do not abide by his commands, if Ariel is not abiding by the commands and order of Prospero, then he will bring pain in his bones, and his all old cramps will then pain, and he will be having unbearable pain, and then he will start crying, roaring in pain. Thus, Caliban must obey Prospero in order to avoid physical pain, and I must obey his art is of such powers. It would control my demagogue Setebos and make a vessel of him. He reveals that how the power of Prospero can cause pain to Caliban. How Prospero can cause pain to all the bones of Caliban, and to avoid the physical pain, Caliban has to follow the order of Prospero. While Prospero's art enables him power over the natural world, and it also grants him power to command and enslave the creatures whom we can consider to be indigenous to the island which he overtakes. Ariel, a spirit indebted to Prospero, whom he addresses as great master. We find over here the relationship of colonizer and colonized. Prospero has colonized not only Caliban but also Ariel, and Ariel calls him his great master. As I mentioned earlier, Ariel was confined in a tree for 12 years until Prospero arrived on the island and released him. Prospero says, "It was mine art when I arrived and heard thee that made gape the pine and let thee out." that it is Prospero, through his magical art, he made Ariel free from the confinement, and he was able to come out from the pine tree where he was confined for 12 years by Sycorax. We further find Prospero that he controls all other natural elements on the island, and he has also promised that once his task is done, when Prospero's aim is fulfilled, then he will release Ariel, and then Ariel reminds Prospero of his promise to release him of his service after 1 year. Prospero threatens him with another 12 years of imprisonment. Thus, due to the great influence of Prospero's art, Ariel, a creature indigenous to this island, must fulfill Prospero the colonizer's commands. So in the beginning, Prospero has said, he has promised that he will take only 1 year's service of Ariel, but when he is reminded, he says that if you seek freedom, then you'll be imprisoned for another 12 years. And so Prospero began as someone who can take little advantage and then finally control over the native inhabitants, which is Ariel. Prospero also enslaves Caliban, who although may not be technically indigenous to the island because his mother, Sycorax, was brought to the island while she was pregnant with him. It can argue that he is indeed the rightful autocrat of the island. When cursing Prospero, Caliban claims that the island is mine and that he is all the subjects that you have, which first was mine own king. So Caliban claims this island belongs to him and everything belongs to him. But now Prospero has usurped it. We find that the properties, the kingdom of Prospero was usurped by his brother. He was thrown out of Milan. But when Prospero comes to this island, then he usurps the island from Caliban. So we find over here the notion of the survival of fittest in nature. Survival of fittest in the human beings, that those who are having power, they can control. Caliban is not human, but is seen as a savage, a thing most brutish. So Caliban is seen as a savage, as a brute, and of a wild race. Therefore, due to Prospero's anthropocentric attitude regarding the natural world and its non-human creatures, he attempts to civilize Caliban with knowledge of language. He tries to teach Caliban language, science, the science of language, and then he feels entitled to enslave the monster of the island, which is Caliban. He attempts to teach and civilize Caliban by teaching him language. And in response, Caliban says he resists this kind of colonization, this kind of domination. And Caliban says, you taught me language, I know how to abuse you. And hence, Caliban is resisting the domination of Prospero. He is resisting the colonization of Prospero. Prospero is not the only human whose anthropocentric attitude allows him to view Caliban as a resource for their own economic and survival use and help. Stefano and Tranquillo too consider the personal gains Caliban can offer them. When Stefano first comes to the contact with Caliban, he evaluates the creatures and states it can recover him and keep him tame and get to Naples with him. He is a present for any emperor that ever trod on needs leader. If I can recover him and keep him tame, I will not take too much for him. He shall pay for him that hath him and thou, and that soundly. Which means Stefano thinks that he can be a gift. So Caliban becomes an object and which can be gifted to a king, which can make them free. Caliban also offers to serve as a native guide to Stefano and Trinculo. I will show thee every fertile inch of the island. He offers to show thee the best spring. I'll pluck thee berries, I'll fish for thee, and get thee wood enough. Let me bring thee where crabs grow, and with my long nails will dig the pine nuts. Show thee a jay's nest, and instruct thee how to snare the nimble marmoset. I'll bring thee young squamals from the rock. In this way, we see that Caliban has become a kind of controlled slave to Stefano and Trinculo. He has become a native informer to Stefano Trinculo, and through them it can be further informed to Prospero. And he is talking about all the natural resources which he can bring, which he can reveal, which he can show, and that can become the source of their benefit, the source of their advantage. He says that he can bring multiple, he can show him fertile land, he can offer the best spring, he can pluck berries, and he can bring wood for burning fire and cooking food. He can catch crabs to eat. He can dig down nuts through his nails. He can do many more things. And in this way, we find that Caliban has become a slave, but at the same time, he is also trying to reveal, he has become an informer to the colonizers, to the people who have come to the island from the outside. Caliban offers to serve Stefano and Trinculo only to be free of the tyrant Prospero. And one can think that what Caliban is doing out of his personal concerns, that he wants to be free, which demonstrates the fact that this native islander can only escape enslavement from one colonizer to the enslavement from others. So we find that he was colonized by Prospero and then later by Trinculo and Stefano. While Prospero's art is unusual and is a product of civilization and the European quest for knowledge, Caliban's knowledge of the island comes naturally to him after living upon it since birth. So Prospero tries to civilize and control, and Caliban has learned by living with the nature, by inhabiting with the nature. Before Prospero's arrival on the island, Caliban was what some may consider uncivilized. However, he need not refer to the book, which information regarding the island's resources and instructions for how to survive in such an environment. So, Caliban is seen as an uncivilized person in the eyes of Prospero in the eyes of Trinculo and Stefano. But he has all the knowledge about the island. He knows how to pluck it. He knows which article exists. He knows what are the resources of the island. Then we find that he was very intelligent person. He has every knowledge about the island. But through the Western perspective, through the perspective of the colonizers, his knowledge has been disregarded. He has been seen as uncivilized, and so they can control over him and get all kind of information from him. And in this way, Prospero's art grants him power over the son of Sycorax, over Caliban. It can be argued that Caliban is naturally more gifted and more powerful than the sorcerer, and the power of sorcerer are less than Caliban. We also find that Prospero has power to control the climate. He plays his magic to manipulate the elements of nature, to manipulate the island, which reveals that how human potentials exert power over nature, and how this raises questions about the responsibility of responsibility of human beings and their potential misuse of power. The storm in the play also signals a metaphor of control. It is a metaphor, and which can be a metaphor for chaos, political upheaval, for punishment. It is seen as a metaphor for disrupting the life of other people. Caliban is seen as an indigenous voice in the play. He is a native inhabitant and is portrayed as a victim of Prospero's colonization. This highlights the potential of environmental degradation and displacement of the indigenous culture and indigenous people. It also reveals that one needs to rethink about contemporary discussion about climate justice. Further, we find that the pastoral representation has been corrupted by city. The play contrasts the island's natural setting with Prospero's former place, former city Milan, and which is depicted as corrupt and decadent, suggesting a moral dichotomy between natural civilization, which is relevant to the current debate about human impact on the environment. From eco-critical perspective, we find that the themes of environmental ethics, human responsibility, and consequences of disrupting natural worlds are very inherent and relevant in the context of the play, and also in the contemporary climate change and challenges. When we look at the modern adaptations of the play Tempest, they explicitly address the changes by using recycled materials, focusing on the fragility of ecosystems and exploring the consequences of human actions on the environment, on the nature. So in this way, the play is embedded in the environmental concerns, and it prompts the audience to reflect over the early modern England's growing power over nature. That how long back in the time of Shakespeare, nature was being controlled, exploited, and misused. The misuse of nature is not just a contemporary thing. We also find that his portrayal of kingship often serves as a metaphor for humanity's tyrannical relationship with natural world. Here, Prospero is having tyrannical relation with the natural world. And in the context of Anthropocene, this metaphor gains new relevance as human becomes a dominant geological force. Human beings become a force of control and domination. And in this way, Shakespeare's compassion for the marginalized figures extend to non-human creatures. Shakespeare highlights the plight of the natural world, and his plays reveal the challenges that nature is facing, the ecology is having because of human entitlement over the nature, because of human intervention in the nature. So to conclude, the representation of the nature in the play is a very complex representation. Nature has been seen as nurturing, as punishing, as a mystical element. We also find that Prospero controls nature and other inhabitants of the island, and he has become a symbol of a metaphor of human domination and human exploitation. We also find that the play is having Caliban's ecological humility and his indigenous wisdom, which he brings with his conversation with Stefano and Tranquillo. In this way, Shakespeare anticipates modern climate ethics and justice. Thank you.